Hi, my name is Jene Stroud. Welcome to my new tutorial, Seahorsing Around. I'm going to be using Brusho today, but feel free to use whatever kind of supplies you like. I'll leave a list of everything else that I use down below. Listen, if you learn just one thing from this video, I hope you'll add it to your skills and pass it on, because that's what keeps our community growing and thriving and being better. All right, let's get into the video. I hope you enjoy it. All right, so I thought I would do something a little bit different today. Instead of waiting till the very end to do the big reveal, I wanted to show you what we're getting ourselves into today from the very beginning. So this is the fun part. You know, you get that painting finished and you get to pull the tape off and kind of see what it looks like for the first time. Something very satisfying about this. So I did this project on a gator board, taped down with masking tape. I keep my easel at about a 30-degree angle. And I'm going to put a little mat around this, make it look nice. Isn't that fun? So now that you know where we're going to be heading with this, let's get into the painting itself. So this is Arch's 140-pound cold press. It's an 11 by 16 sheet of paper. I'm going to just start out showing a piece of paper towel there, which will figure prominently into this, and the brushes that I'm using, which are basically Chinese calligraphy style brushes. There's a lizard lick, which is a fine point liner brush that Cheap Joe's makes, and we'll talk about a little 1/4 inch flat brush in a little bit, which will figure very prominently in this painting. And there's my palette. Excuse the mess. I'd clean it out, but I love all the ambient colors that live in the little nooks and crannies in between paintings. Sometimes they're just these really magical little pieces of puzzles that I like to pull out. So that's why I leave my palette like that. The spray bottle that I'm using here is one of those ultra compressing ones that almost sprays out like a fog. They're wonderful spray bottles. They just do a super fine mist. And working with gravity, starting at the top, time to lay down a first wash. And even though we're going to be underwater here, you can see the sky. So just like you would do with a regular landscape, we're going to start out with a nice blue sky above, and then I'm going to bring that down and show you how to work some warm foreground into a background without getting green, which normally you would get with blue and yellow. But I'm starting out fairly thick paint here. And we'll talk a lot about consistencies of pigments, so we have a language to discuss. But basically this is going to be almost, I'd say, a coffee, not quite milk consistency. I want to keep the light of the paper coming through, but see, notice I put the warm color on the bottom, and there's that little bead at the bottom of the blue. And by starting out with the warms on the bottom and working up into this blue, I'll bring them together in a moment and we won't get green, and that's really a magical moment. So there's the brown, bring it right up into it. I'm just going to touch it one time and let it flow, and that's where the magic happens. Now this is a seafloor, so it's going to have coral reefs and all kinds of fun features. So I'm going to start working in, just dropping some pigment in. This is one of the times I really love these calligraphy brushes. They hold so much paint and so much water. I can just load it up and charge it in, and as long as I put the brush down and don't lift it up, it just keeps delivering and delivering and delivering paint. Isn't that fun? As long as that first wash is still wet, this is all going to diffuse and hopefully look like just kind of far away features, things in the distance, nice and soft. Watercolors are all about timing. Everything's about timing. How much the paint is drying, how much the water is moving. and you kind of get a feel for, if you've ever seen a painting video sped up, it looks like a living, breathing thing. I mean, the paint just flows and moves around. It's really fun to see. And I'm catching those drips at the bottom. If you leave too much paint pooled up at the bottom, it can dry and flood back and create blooms. So that's why I'm real careful about catching that. And I'll go around the edges of the board too and catch any drips there, just so I don't get any surprise runners when we don't want them. So again, I've mentioned that the paper towel was going to figure prominently in this painting, and here's the first instance of it. I've actually rolled the paper towel up almost into a pencil shape. You can't see it because my hand's in the way. But I'm using that paper towel to lift back out paint. And I'm doing this instead of using masking fluid because, I mean, you could mask out the seahorse and paint around it, but I find what happens is a lot of times the paint will run around the masking fluid and it'll make an outline effect, kind of like a coloring book. And I don't want the seahorse to look like it was cut out and pasted on there, or for it to be outlined. So by doing that nice first soft wash and then going back in with the paper towel like this and lifting it back out, it's gonna make it blend in with the background, for lack of a better term. It's just, it helps with the transparency. And you know, if some of the background color gets on the seahorse, it can look like reflected color. It's very pleasing to the eye for me to see the colors all kind of meld together and not separate. So anyway, that's a long way of just saying this is a fun way to bring something forward, to use paper towel to lift it out. And we're going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in this painting. It's one of the big techniques that I wanted to share with you today. Now as this dries, and then I'm kind of trying to keep a timer in the back of my mind because I want to add more to that background, but I have to wait for it to dry a little bit. And you have to remember also, because of gravity, it dries from the top down, because of course the water is flowing down, so the top will dry out soonest. But I keep going back into this and lifting that back out to bring the seahorse forward. Now I also want to mention, you have to be really careful when you lift out like this with the paper towel. You can easily bruise your paper, and once paper is bruised, it's hard for it to recover, and it'll get kind of a dark spot, and it's really not attractive. So it may not really look like it, but I am really very gingerly, very gently dabbing that paper towel to lift that paint up. All you really need to do is just let it soak into capillary action wise into the paper towel, and that really just means contact. It doesn't mean a lot of pushing. Now this little fin on the back of the seahorse is going to be a big feature, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this. But you can see right there, I'm lifting it out. I want some of the background to go through that fin though, because it's literally like a transparent, like a cellophane. And so I want some of the background to show through it. But we are going to hit that with some black Brusho in a little bit. It's just crazy fun. But it's got rather remarkable, isn't it, already, how that seahorse is coming forward and the background is starting to retreat. And even though it's not perfect, it reads very well. I love the gravity of that. So yeah, still catching drips and things, and like I said, I don't want to have any surprises. And you know, you may want to pick your painting up sometimes to lose an edge somewhere, and if you've got a big drop of water sitting on the side, it can run across your painting. And while I know there are such thing as happy accidents, there's also such thing as just accidents. And so trying to eliminate as many of those as possible by cleaning up around your board as you go. So now I've got this calligraphy brush again, and I've put some fairly thick paint on it. I'd say this is more consistency of cream now. And I'm doing, and I'm going to coin a phrase here, it's not dry brushing, I'm really doing what I call damp brushing. Because the paper is still damp, and the brush is damp with paint. So it's really going to just find more and lesser damper areas, and that will break it up and give it this really nice kind of staccato effect. And I love to do this because all the marks that I'm making now, while they're going to be there sort of, because there's still a lot of movement because of the dampness of the paper, they will soften out a lot too. And you know, the thing about watercolor, and everyone says watercolor is so difficult to do, and yes, it does have its challenges, but oh my goodness, when you put watercolor down and you get out of its way and you let it do what it does, it really is just magic. It's something that a clumsy human hand can't do on purpose. It's just organic and it's wonderful. And you might have noticed there also, I was trying to drag that color right through the snout of the horse, because if you paint on one side of something, you want to make sure and paint on the other side of it so that the eye doesn't see it as a place that got stopped and not finished. So I always try, like on the tail there, to paint on one side. I'm going to drag that color through to the other side so it translates. And there again, that red went right through the snout on both sides, and that tells the eye that this belongs in front, the horse, and the background belongs behind it. So this isn't going to move around quite as much as when it was wet, but you can still see it. It's sort of softening and it's starting to retreat. It's a lovely effect. Now I'm gonna go in, and you'll see me do this several times as this progresses, but I'm cleaning those edges up. But again, not too much. I actually try to find places where the background and the foreground, or the focal point, which is going to be the seahorse, try to find places where they both have the same color in common and tie it together. The more you can do that, the less your foreground or your focal point will look cut out and pasted on. It kind of just brings everything together. So here's the hero of the show today, I really think. It's a very unassuming little brush. It's a 1/4 inch flat brush, and I think if I were shipwrecked on a desert isle, I probably could make my own brushes to paint with, but I would really miss this little brush maybe more than any other. And I'll tell you what's so wonderful about it. This little flat brush has this magic way of being able to go around and just soften out edges without leaving walls behind that will trick your eye or catch your eye, like a hangnail. It just has a way of going along and just softening things out. And I'm talking nurse talk, I'm going to use this quite a bit for doing the lifting later on in the video. But you can see right here, it's just perfect for going around and catching and softening edges that are a little bit too distinct. Or, you know, maybe they get right up to like the focal point, but there's that little tiny gap that would normally like make you but with this little flat brush I can soften it real nice. It's just a magic little tool. I love this brush. I really don't want to ever be without one. It's indispensable for me. So in a lot of ways too, right now I'm just trying to pass a little time while I'm letting that background dry a little bit more. This is the perfect opportunity to just work on this a little bit. Keep cleaning it up. The seahorse has really come forward now. Masking fluid definitely has its place, and I do like to use it, but I just feel like it can tend to be a little bit clumsy. And a lot of times you almost end up doing more work than it saves you, trying to make it look believable once you've peeled it off. So I'm doing part softening right here of the edges, and maybe just a little lifting out too. I have a nice bucket of clean water off to the side there, and I dip the brush into it and then squeegee it off a little bit. And clean it up around the edges a little more. You don't want to get blooms. Not that blooms are always bad, but I'd rather make them when I want them. So talk about consistencies of paint. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. One of the languages that we use to describe how much paint you pick up in your brush, in other words, how thick a paint do I want to have? And of course, the more contrast, or the darker the color you want, the more paint you're going to want to have on your brush, or the thicker, which means less water. So in describing consistencies of paint, I like to use like dairy analogy or coffee analogies. Like, so tea would be a very weak wash, a very light wash with more water, just a little bit of paint. And then coffee would be just a little bit darker. And then you would move into milk, which is a little bit thicker. So you'd have thicker paint, more paint, less water. And then you could go to a cream consistency, which is when you start to really get your darks, or you want to make a real statement. And then you can go all the way to butter or toothpaste consistency, which is like paint right out of a tube. But by describing those quantities of paint in terms that we can all relate to, it gives us a language you can use so we can talk about how much paint we're using at a time. So, for example, that first wash that I did, that was definitely a tea, coffee, a very light wash. We'll call it a coffee wash because there was some pigment at the top there. But when I start putting in the background here, and I'm going to make a horizon line in a little bit, it's going to be very dark. I'm going to go into that with like heavy cream consistency of paint because I want to have a real good dark. So right now I'm just going to keep working around with that tissue, lifting that out and kind of pushing those edges back. Because it's more moist at the bottom, because gravity is bringing the water down to the bottom of the painting, it's going to keep flooding back into the image there. So I'm just going to very patiently keep lifting it back gently so I don't bruise the paper. What a magical creature seahorse is. This is a fun painting. This is not the first time I've painted one. They kind of remind me of an elephant too when doing the tail. Elephants are my favorite thing to paint in the animal kingdom. And the seahorse kind of reminds me of the elephant, certainly the trunk anyway, on the tail. But yeah, they're part horse, part fish. They have wings, like the Pegasus of the sea. I just find them fascinating. I think they're so beautiful. This is as close to painting, fantasy as you can get in painting something that actually really exists. What a beautiful world we live in. Absolutely beautiful world we live in. So going to continue to clean that shape up. I'm waiting for the background to catch up a little bit. It's a good moment to sit back and look at the painting a little bit and start thinking about what it needs as far as textures. I really like that horizontal red in the foreground there. It's important to have diagonals in your painting. It leads the eye in and through. I try to always make sure I've got some strong horizontals in my paintings. So now it's going to be time to go in and strengthen up the background a little bit. Now it's starting to dry, and so I'm still doing what I would consider damp brushing, but it's a little bit more towards dry now. I know this will soften out a little bit, but again, it's all about timing, so I'm trying to keep in the back of my mind as I'm doing this a little running clock of when I think I still have time to put some paint down. Because once it's dry, it's a whole different sort of effect, and I'm not ready to do that just yet. If you put too much into the background, dry brush-wise, it would come forward, and I don't want that to compete with our seahorse. So just some very soft marks here. And what's kind of happening is the damper places are going to pick up the paint from the brush now. And so I'm just sort of skimming over it. And it really does just give it this wonderful texture. And I'm painting right over the fin, of course, of the seahorse because it's a transparent fin. And now we talked about consistency of paint. Now I'm going in with a cream consistency and much thicker paint because I want to put a dark in. And this is sort of my version of a horizon line. It definitely needed something, though, to break it up in a place to sort of to anchor the land. So I'm going to go in here with some, I use French ultramarine and burnt sienna. I mix the two together. That's how I create my darks. And then depending on if I want a cool cool dark for the background, I'll use ultramarine and burnt sienna, and then I'll add some cobalt or blue to it. And if I want a warm shadow or a warm background, I will use a little bit of rose madder mixed in with it, or maybe a little bit of crimson to warm it up. But my basic dark is always going to be ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And that's what I've got here. And I'm dragging it right across the seahorse a little bit because, again, I want it to blend and not have a line. Ever so carefully lifting it back out. Do you have a favorite dark that you like to mix? If you left a comment, I'd love to hear what your favorite formula is for darks. Here I'm going to go, and again, the paper is still a little bit damp, and that's why this is still working. I'm mixing up a heavy cream yogurt kind of consistency now, dark, and charging that in there because I really want to strengthen that horizon line, which isn't exactly straight across, but it does break up the painting a bit. And then ever so gently just adding some little cracks and crevices here and there. Give that background a little bit of interest. And it's starting to be believable. I can actually see seafloor out there and coral reefs, and that's really fun. And the funny thing is the paint has really done most of the work. One thing you'll see me do, and I'm not doing it just this moment, but I want to talk about it a little bit. Periodically, I will paint with my non-dominant hand, which is not something I grew up doing. I'm very right hand dominant, and it never really occurred to me to use my left hand for things. But I found that painting, and especially when you're losing edges in your non-dominant hand, can be almost like a superpower. And so I highly encourage people to try, because I think the number one most requested topic of any workshop I've ever done, the thing people seem to ask for the most is, how do I paint looser? How do I soften my watercolor? So what can I do to add some interest? And you see, I just charged a little bit of periwinkle in there. Oh, that was so powerful, just dropping that periwinkle in just now. But one of the things you can do to loosen your watercolors up is to paint with your, if you're right-handed, paint with your left hand. And if you're left-handed, of course, paint with your right. It will just add magic to your paintings. And it's a great technique, too, because if you want to lose an edge, sometimes it's really hard to do if you're right-handed and the edge is on the right, because you kind of have to go backwards at it. But if you just put the brush in your left hand, you can simply lose that edge in a natural way. Or a lot of people will just take their paintings and they'll pick them up and they'll rotate them and they'll turn them upside down, and then they can lose that edge that way. But I highly recommend just trying to paint, with your non-dominant hand. You'll do magical things. So now I'm really working on the distant features in the background, and I want them to just be ever so soft. And where I can, I drag it right into the seahorse. And then you can always go back and lift it out once you've brought it across. That way you don't get a line. It's kind of like a painting version of it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, sort of a thing. And look at this wonderful texture, dragging that paint now across that foreground there, just to make it look like the seafloor texture watercolor. It's just wonderful stuff. There's some more horizontals. I don't want to do too much with the foreground in this. I want it to have a nice quiet place for the eyes to rest. And again, the seahorse is the focal point. It's the star of the show. It's the actor on the stage. The coral reef, the landscapes, the background. That's like the curtain, the backdrop that you'd see on a stage. It's the actors that we want to, to bring attention to. And something that you'll rarely see me do is dabbing a lot when I paint. Typically, like right now, you notice I put my brush down, I have paint in it. I don't lift it up a whole lot. I like to put the brush down and let the paint just be delivered from it. Every now and then I do. There are times when you should dab around, but for the most part, if you really want to make a beautiful statement with your paint, load your brush up with paint, set it down, move it around, and let it flow. You'll get completely different marks. As I just start dabbing like crazy there. I love that dark horizon line. That made a nice statement. I usually don't paint this much for a first wash. Typically, a first wash for me will be just heaven and earth, sky and ground, or sky and water. Because I tend to try to have a formula for my paintings and keep them as simple as possible. But this background had to be painted all in one go the first time because I really wanted it all to kind of melt together. So I call this a first wash, but I really did do a lot more here than I normally do. But it's working out lovely. I really wanted to have all that lovely sea feature there in the background and in the foreground and all the sand below it. So I'm covering up certain areas right now, and I'm just taking water with my fingers, dipping it in my bucket and flicking it at the painting because I want to have just a little bit of texture, and I really didn't want to splash it into that nice soft wash that is the sky background there. Although it could have, it would look like underwater bubbles maybe, but I wanted to have some little water splashes just to give that foreground some texture. But what's important now, and the hardest part for me, of course, is this is the time to walk away and just let it dry. And so that's what I'm going to do. And then once it's had a chance to dry, I'll come back to it, take a little break, and then continue. But you have to let your paintings rest, or at least I do. If you just keep painting and painting, you can worry it and make it look labored. So that was the time to quit. And now that it is dry, and there's that brush that I've been talking about so much, a close look at it, the little 1/4-inch flat brush. I'm going to use just real clear water. And now that this has had a chance to actually really dry and set up, this is when I can come in and define my edges a little bit more. This is the time to clean it up. Because now we're going to start painting on the focal point, which is the seahorse itself. And I think what I love about this brush too is the bristles are just stiff enough to move and to lift and to actually, make a statement, but without bruising or hurting the paper or tearing the tooth of the paper up too much. It's just a perfect stiffness of the bristles. And you can see just as I clean up this edge here. But notice as I do that, it's not creating an outline. It's just taking off the paint that doesn't really need to be there right now. Just going to soften around there. To me, just that right there is just magical. And maybe that's some of that dark gets on the seahorse there a little bit. That's okay. It's just bounce lighting. It's reflected color from the seafloor shining up onto the unicorn. Gosh, wouldn't that be cool if there was a unicorn seahorse? Maybe we'll have to paint one. I mean, we're artists, right? We can paint whatever we want to. Isn't that cool? And I'm just dipping into nice clear water, not too much. Pat it out a little bit. Just keep it nice damp brush. And it's just letting me lift and lift. Arches paper can take a lot of punishment. I mean, it's pretty hardy stuff. Like I said earlier, you don't want to press on it so hard with a paper towel that you bruise it, but it's pretty good about being able to take colors back off. Now, of course, it depends on the colors that you're using too. Most of the colors that I put down in my first wash were pretty opaque. Your staining colors like phthalo blue and alizarin crimson, they don't lift off quite as easy because they're staining colors. So if you're going to use this lifting technique, you might want to make sure that the paints that you're using are more opaque. The heavier pigments granular pigments, they'll come up a little easier. But that's not to say that you can't use the stainers. I want to talk a little bit about the paint that I'm using. I have been painting with American Journey paint now for years, and I highly recommend it. Not just because I'm a super fan of Cheap Joe's and absolutely adore the people that work there and the whole entire company because they're amazing. But they have their own chemists and their own labs, and they don't just slap their name on another paint manufacturer and call it theirs. They actually make their own paints, and they're lovely paints. Price wise and value wise, they're so reasonable price compared to some of the other paints on the market, and I absolutely have never had anything but great success with them. So I'm using today the American Journey paints, and they're great, and you can get those at Cheap Joe's, and they always have good sales going. You can subscribe to their newsletters and get coupons, and they're always sending out specials on a regular basis. They're good down home folks, and a great company to support. Yep, professional grade quality paint. I love the big tubes too. I usually get the larger tubes when I order paint there. It's just something nice about having a big tube of paint and not have to worry about, taking little tiny tubes of paint and stretching them out. It's comforting to be able to take a tube of paint and squeeze it out into your palette and just paint with it. Not to waste it or anything, just knowing that there's plenty of paint there for you and you can get more if you need it. Anyway, it's generous, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Look at softening the back there, how it just made that the coral reef in the background just kind of disappeared behind the seahorse. It's all the little things that trick the eye that matter, and softening edges is definitely a huge tool in your arsenal of tricking a seer and giving an effect that you want to give. This might seem like a lot of work to get the seahorse ready to be painted, but this is all going to pay off because pretty soon this is going to be the whole star of the show, and it's going to be so lovely to have all that light behind it. It's going to make this thing just glow, absolutely glow. And I tend to paint with big mop brushes and lots of water flowing and paint flying around everywhere. So painting like this, where I'm doing all this little fiddly stuff, is not indicative of my style, but I definitely love doing this. Gently there, my friend, gently. So do you have any special techniques that you want to share? You want to put them in the comments down below? You know, if you do, maybe somebody will read something that you've come up with, and then they'll be able to pass it on, and maybe, I don't know, that'll just be the right thing that they needed to hear at that moment, and it makes their day, and a new work of art is born. I'd love to share, and that's why I make these videos. Painting has given me so much over these many years. I'm very grateful. It's been quite an amazing journey, and I just feel so blessed to be part of the art community and to have found watercolor painting. It's a joy. It's kind of remarkable looking at this now, other than when I was painting it, to see just how much that seahorse has come forward without using anything other than lifting it with a piece of paper towel. And it's really not a super powerful background, but it's really reading. And what I'm going to do here now, I kind of want to, I call it plowing the field. Before I start painting into this, I'm going to put a layer of just clear water on it. So when I do start painting it, because I want to keep this first layer of paint on the seahorse, I want to keep it very bright and light. So I'll be going in with yellows and very light oranges and just a little bit of reds. But I want them to be very translucent and very glowy. So by adding a little bit of water first, it's going to let the paint just organically move around, I guess, when I apply it here momentarily. Watercolor fascinates me. There are just worlds inside of worlds there. It's kind of like looking at a sunset. I mean, just beautiful. Must have found a little edge that needed a little love. And speaking of timing, now that I put that water on, I'm giving it a moment to set in and swell up just a little bit before I start applying the paint. And those little areas just need just a littlest bit of softening. And then it's time to start adding a little bit of color. I'll leave a list of the paints that I use in the description. But I tend to keep a pretty simple palette. I have a warm and a cool yellow, red, and blue. Then a couple specialty colors that I really like periwinkle or turquoise. But for the most part, I like to mix my own colors. So I start out with pretty basic primaries, and I go from there. And I think that's because of years and years. I was a hairstylist. I did hair color for 40 years. And so mixing colors comes pretty naturally to me after so many years of trying to figure out how to take somebody who has turned their hair orange and make it brown again. But yeah, so this is a Naples yellow. And man, talk about a powerful color. I had a teacher once when I first started that recommended Naples to me, and I thought that I'd already figured out the kind of yellow that I wanted, so I said no thank you, and then he said, well, okay, but something the way he said that reminded me of how my father would say okay when I was about to learn something the hard way. So I wised up and I listened to him, and thank goodness I did, because Naples yellow is an absolutely indispensable color to have. It's opaque, so it'll go on and it'll cover things when you need it to. It's bossy and it's got presence, but at the same time it's a light color. I mean, look how glowy that yellow is. It's just beautiful. But it's definitely a color that I absolutely could not live without. I love Naples yellow. So I'm putting some Naples yellow in here, and also working in some Halloween orange. Halloween orange is a American Journey color. I'm not sure what the exact formulation of it is, but it's their orange. It's an indispensable color. I actually use it in conjunction with a turquoise to make a green. I even have my own paint that you can buy from Cheap Joe's called War Jean Dusty Green, which is a mix of the Halloween orange and turquoise. It's a lovely, lovely green. I encourage you to give that a look if you have a second. It's super fun stuff. But yeah, the Halloween orange mixing with the yellow here and just kind of putting it in. Oh gosh, it looks like candy almost. It's just so beautiful. And I love how these two are blending together. And because I took the extra step of adding that water to paint into, it's just going to be soft and diffused, and it's going to flow around and just do magical things. I know it looks like I'm dabbing a lot here, but I'm really, for the most part, I'll put some paint down, I'll charge into it, and then I'll just let it kind of dispense. Just let it flow out of the brush. See, those are all one movements pretty much. I'm also keeping in mind as I do this, and I have no way of showing it to you just yet, but it'll become apparent soon. I'm thinking as I'm painting this, I really want to have a fairly good amount of color down, because part of the technique that I want to share with you today is what I call heavy lifting. We're going to do some heavy lifting to bring out some features on the Seahorse later, and in order to do that, I need to put some paint down to lift back out again. So while I am keeping this fairly light, I do want to put enough pigment down that I can move it around later. So I'm going to tend to overpaint this just a tiny bit. Now the reason I'm using the paper towel on that front edge, the belly of the Seahorse, is because the light is coming from the left-hand side. It's hitting the ocean floor and it's bouncing up onto our friend here. There'll be more shadows on the right-hand side. It'll get darker on his back and lighter on the front, and that contrast will give him a lot more. Or maybe her. I don't know if it's a him or her. But it'll give it a lot more gravitas. Working around that back fin. Oh, that's going to be so much fun. And we'll be applying some Brusho in the next step, which is a lot of fun. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's a crystal powdered watercolor. What a hoot. Absolutely going to do some crazy textures. So charging in some more color, setting the stage. But it's lovely how that orange has diffused now. And again, watercolor is amazing. Put your paint in, set your pigment down, get out of its way and let the paint do its work, and it's absolutely magical. Now that whole mark I just made, I don't think I lifted the brush off of the paper all the way. That whole time was almost all one brush stroke, because I have pigment in that brush that's just flowing out, almost like a fountain pen. And I love to get to a part in a painting, and there's several places this happens, where you kind of just look at it, you sit back a little bit and think, how can I make this look rounder? What can I do to push this back? What can I do to bring this forward? Painting, it is an ethereal, blissful, la-di-da kind of a thing that we do, but at the same time, it's very cerebral. It's almost like a puzzle. Your mind gets fully engaged with how to make things work, I guess. And for me, that's one of the greatest pleasures of all this is figuring out the little bits. Now again, that's still fairly damp in there, so I know if I make marks, they're going to diffuse quite a bit, just like with the background. So I guess this is sort of a version of damp brushing. And what I'm doing now is just going in with thicker consistencies of paint. So the first yellows and oranges were maybe coffee to milk, and now I'm going in with just a little bit of not quite heavy cream, but we're getting there. I'm just starting to make the ridge lines. Those are going to become very pronounced. Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. Have I mentioned I love painting? And if anybody's interested, I've already photographed this painting and had prints of it made. It'll be on my website if anybody's interested in a copy. Kind of fun to have. They're fairly inexpensive and high quality. My website is artofward.com. That's ARTOFWARD.com, artofward.com. You can also get supply lists there and lists of all the paints and things, the brushes that I use. I'll put them down below, but that's another place you can find them. Adding some extra pigment in that tail, make it work a little more. Boy, that paper towel is really getting a workout today. It's probably the most paper towel I've ever used in a painting. And still saving that little fin on the back there. Because again, this is really only an underpainting. I mean, you could probably, just paint this to here and add some shadows and be done. But we're going to add a whole nother level of paint with the crystal powdered watercolor with the Brusho here in a minute. It's super fun. But again, I think at this point I just needed to have a little more pigment in there because we're going to be lifting back out again, and so in order to do that I needed some paint to lift back out. So charging it up a little bit more, adding a little bit thicker paint. It's starting to dry a little bit, so it's going to be more receptive to the pigments that I'm putting in. Careful not to use too much water because I don't want it to get blooms. So again, damp brushing, not a wet brush. It's pretty much damp with heavier pigment in it. And now I'm going in with definitely heavy cream. Thick pigment. How fun is that? In this seahorse, it could have been purple, it could have been green. I'm pretty sure if you can imagine it in nature, it exists somewhere. Just like sunsets, I can't imagine there's a sky that you could ever paint with any paint from any palette of any manufacturer, any combination you could put together, that nature hasn't at one point or another made a sunset just like that, and then some. So don't hold your imagination back when painting something. Chances are it really did exist somewhere. And really nobody's going to come around and inspect it and grade you on it anyway. It's your painting. You paint it how you want to. Notice the texture of the background, how it's dried now, and it just, you can almost see rocks and crevices and little places for sea anemones to live. It's just magical. All right, and you're not seeing me doing the dabbing there. Yeah, what I'm doing is actually I put on some clear water there, and I'm just softening that out a little bit. I really want to keep that front edge light. It needs to read round. So by lightening up the left side and darkening up the right, it will definitely read as a 3D being. I feel like I've been painting on this for quite a while, and when you're painting, you put out a lot more energy, I think, than people realize. And I talked a little bit earlier about needing to rest and let the painting rest and dry out between the different layers. So it'll be time to let this one dry soon. I'm just making some last minute adjustments, sitting back and looking to see if there's any areas or trouble spots. What I'm using right here, it's the lizard lick brush. This is a liner brush. It's got a very fine tip on it, and I'm using it in this instance like the little flat brush, just to go around the edges, just where I find trouble spots, anywhere that my eye gets snagged a little bit by a jagged edge or something that doesn't feel right, and I'm just softening it out. all those little spaces. Really, I think what I'm doing right now more than anything is just enjoying painting. I remember as I did this, it was just so much fun to paint. I enjoyed just every minute of it. This is definitely my happy place. But having said that, do have a care to not just paint to paint too much, because you don't want your painting to get labored and to suffer. So I'm probably telling myself at this time, all right, you've done a lot. You've got your paint down. You got the seahorse underlayer done. This is working nicely. You can keep painting on this and fiddling and fidgeting with it, but maybe now is going to be a good time to just stop and let it rest. The next part's going to be just absolutely a hoot. And so it's going to be time to get the Brusho out, to lay my table flat, to lay the easel flat, because I don't do the Brusho with gravity. I don't want the paper tilted. Although there are some techniques for that, but that's a whole nother video. So yeah, it's going to be time to let this rest, and we're going to move on to the next step. I'll go get a cup of coffee or go for a little walk, stretch my legs, look around a little bit. Sometimes I'll get out an instrument, maybe play some music. But yeah, it's definitely time to take a break and let this dry. That was a lot of painting there. And we're back. So now that it is dried, gosh, look at those textured backgrounds. Oh, I love it. So Brusho, let me talk about Brusho just a little bit. Brusho is an ink and dye based crystal powdered watercolor. It is from Europe. It was there for many, many years before it came to the US. Although I guess, gosh, it's been like 10 years now. Man, time flies. But I remember when Brusho first came to the US, I was luckily one of the first artists to stumble across it. And it was just love at first sight. I mean, for the first time I saw it and what its capabilities were, I've just been in love with it and have had so much fun. It's got, I think there's 32 colors now, and there's a couple other makers now besides Brusho that do the crystal powdered watercolors. But it's such a good bargain too. You get these little pots of paint, and the little canisters that the paint comes in. I have honestly been using the same canisters for years now. It just almost never seems to get used up. I mean, a little of it just goes such a long ways. Anyway, it's a really super fun paint to use. Now you can put it, you can put the powder into water. You can, you can use it. You can put the powder into a little bowl or something and make it into a liquid paint and just use it as you would a regular paint, like a watercolor. There's all kinds of ways to use Brusho. What we're going to do today is, and you can see what I'm doing here, I'm actually using the sable brush, which I don't usually use, the Kolinsky sable, but I wanted to do it here because it's such a soft brush. I didn't want to disturb the underpainting too much. So what I've done is just put down a layer of water with the sable brush over the seahorse, because it's very difficult to control the powder. Once you start sprinkling it around, it can make a mess real quick. But it's much easier to control the water. So by putting the water down with the brush right where I want the paint to be, when I put the particles on it, it will only activate wherever the water is. And that's how you control Brusho, or it's one way of controlling it. Now I'm doing that very softly. I don't want to move that paint around below, but that's why it's so important that you let this dry in between your layers. Take a good break and let that painting really rest. So it's definitely a very staining color because it's an ink and dye based paint. It definitely will stain your paper, and it'll be harder to lift off than, say, a regular opaque watercolor. So I'm using 3 colors today. I'm using a black Brusho, an orange, and a lemon yellow. And so you can see the little canister here. And I don't open the canisters up. What I do is I punch a hole in the top of them and then put a push pin in to close it. So I almost use it like a salt shaker. But what I've done here is I've taken the orange and the yellow Brusho and I put it on this piece of scratch paper, and I'm using that scratch paper and I'm just gently tapping it, because Brushos like chili peppers. I mean, a little bit can really go a long way, and I've seen people just obliterate their beautiful drawings by just dumping too much Brusho on it. So by delivering it with that little piece of paper, it lets me graciously just add a little bit. Now, I felt like it needed just a little bit more pop, so I picked up a canister and I'm just tapping it now to put a little more. But all I'm trying to do is just to get some texture. I'm using the crystals to make spots. Now I could take a brush with water on it and start painting into it, but if I did that, it would become like a paint and it would homogenize, and I don't want that effect. I want it to have the staccato effect like this. I want to have this texture. And because those crystals are only activating wherever there's water, I'm not worried about it obliterating my background because it's only going to activate where it's wet. But notice the black tail there. Isn't that crazy? Just a little bit, being super careful. I really wanted to look like just one of those really cool like computer skins that just went on top of the seahorse. And because I've got that beautiful underpainting under there with the lights and the darks and the heavies and the lights, it's going to read 3D. Now I'm very gently lifting up the excess water, the standing water, because again, I don't want the crystals to start running and to get homogenized. I want to keep those little dots everywhere. So by just gently tapping that will arrest the crystals and the color from spreading. If I wanted it to be softer, I could have just left it really wet, and eventually those crystals would have spread out and kind of became one big freckle. But what an awesome technique. And this is definitely one of those cases of less is more. I don't want to mess around with this now. That's exactly the kind of effect that I wanted to have. And so it'll be time to let this rest. If you haven't tried Brusho, I highly recommend it. It's super fun to do, and I've got so many YouTubes and so many videos out there, and there's more and more all the time. There's amazing books that you can get on Brusho. Pick a couple of them up and give it a go. Seen people use this with alcohol inks. Oh my gosh, so much fun. Now I'm very carefully going to go back in and just add a little bit more clear water because I wanted to have a little bit more of the black spots on that tail, and I missed that top part just a little bit, so I'm going to go in and just dab a little tiny bit more. But man, black is like it's if brush is like a chili pepper, then black is like scorpion chili. Just a little tiny bit, and then dab it off, and that will arrest it, and it'll be time to step away and let this just rest. So now that's nice and dry, and I mean dry, like out in the desert for 3 months in the hot sun dry. I can take a paper towel and slough off all the extra crystals that were everywhere. It will keep, I'll be able to paint over this now without the Brusho crystals bleeding and changing what we're going to do. But you definitely want to make sure that you've got a super, super dry surface before you do this. You don't want to smear those crystals around. It will be heartbreaking. So we're ready for the next step. Look at that lovely texture. And again, could have put purple on there, could have done blue. I mean, it's our seahorse. Could have done anything with it in the world. I wanted to just kind of do oranges and yellows and keep it somewhat subdued. But sky's the limit. Go crazy. So I tend to do, like most watercolors, I start with lights and then I gradually work up to the darks. Normally the last step of my paintings is going to be adding shadow shapes. I'll go in with my landscapes and put the tree shadows across the fields, or the foliage shadows. And then finish off with, the real fine details or the jewels. Now I'm going to actually do the eye first here. Eye is going to be the focal point of the focal point. They always are. Any creature, human, dog, kitty, even in trees, if a tree has an eye, I mean, that's always going to be a focal point. So it's super important that I got that right. I went in with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and a little bit of neutral tint because I wanted a black, and painted that eye very strong. So now I watered that down a little bit, but this is still fairly heavy consistency. For shadows, I'm going to be using heavy cream, milkish cream, like International Coffee cream heavy. Right behind the jaw there in the neck, that's definitely a big shadow area. This is where things really start. I call it more sculpting than painting, because in a way that's what you're doing. You're, by pushing things in with shadows, you're bringing other parts forward or bring them out. I mean, look how much that rounded off that jaw by adding that shadow in the neck. Powerful stuff. Go right along the mouth there and put the mouth line in. Zoom. And this is going to be one of the darker areas. I love this little Shrek thing on top of its head. I wanted that to be very pronounced. It's an important part of the painting. So yeah, in order to make the eye come out, you paint a little bit dark around it, and all of a sudden the eye ridge just pops right out. Now it's time to have a little bit of fun. These are very heady marks. I mean, that's just so fun to do. Now again, as I do this, I'm keeping in mind, and you won't see it yet, but I know what I want to do with this eventually, and I'm putting this paint down knowing that I'm going to come back and lift out some highlights. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to share this with you. But yeah, just these are a little bit darker than I would tend to do, but that's because I know I'm going to lift some paint back out in a little bit. I'm going to go dark right along that fin, and that fin's got some ridges on it too, and the shadow's going to play a big part of that. But that's going to get a lot darker in a minute. Isn't that fun? What a difference the shadow makes. I did mix a little bit of orange into my shadow. I tend to put a little bit of whatever color I'm painting against in with my darks, unless I want to have super contrast, and then I'll do an opposite, but that's another story. One of the best blending tools that we have as painters is our fingers. You'll see me a lot during a painting You know, if I want to lose an edge, you can use a spray bottle. There's times for that, and there's other times I just take my finger and just dab it a little bit, and it just softens it out just perfectly. I've got lots of fingerprints in my paintings. The trick here with painting this tail is I want it to read with the ridges and everything, but I don't want to paint it so much that it gets graphic looking, like comic booky, if that makes any sense. And it'll definitely help once I start putting in shadows on there for modeling. Speaking of which, here come some darks now. That was all one brush stroke. Again, gotta love those calligraphy brushes. They hold lots and lots of paint. And there's the ridges of that transparent fin on the back. No, this video is going longer. I've been doing a lot of time lapse and speed videos because I think people have pretty short attention spans, especially on social media. But so many people ask me to do a full-length real-time video, so here it is in all of its glory. I'm taking my time today, and I'm going to do a painting with you 100% so you can see the entire process. I'm really glad you're stopping by today to check this out. So yeah, working some shadows, putting more paint down, bringing out more detail, reinforcing the shape of the tail. Again, this is more like sculpting at this point. You know, you step back and look and see what needs to come forward, what needs to go back. I definitely wanted to put some shadows in, and again, I love the diagonals, so I'm going to put some shadow shapes across the seafloor in those lovely diagonals. Push some of the features of the rocks back a little bit by adding some darks there, and then not too much, but you know, like maybe here just a little right across the snout. Don't want to lose that lovely texture, but it needed some darks, needed some shadow shapes. Maybe just a little extra reinforcing there. The reason I went darker there is I wanted the seahorse to definitely come forward a little bit, so by doing the dark it pushed that back. But not competing with the horizon line, that's still the darkest spot. I wanted that to be the most powerful. And then just a little bit of shadow glazing. The next step is going to be to lift out highlights into this, and it really is. It's a wonderful technique. I can't wait. So yeah, by adding some more color here, some more pigment, just a little bit, darken it up just a little bit, it's going to allow it to have more highlights in a minute. So there's a method to this madness. It's remarkable to me that we can take a piece of paper, a two-dimensional piece of paper, a brush, and some pigments, and in how you apply those colors to that piece of paper, you can make something that floats up off of the page that actually looks three-dimensional, that has, a place in space. It's this really magical thing to me. I look around at the magazines and things and other YouTubes and other painting videos and see what artists do, and it just amazes me. Like ballet and good literature, our species is capable of such amazing feats. There's so much potential. So here I am adding some more darks to that dark fin already, but if you can't beat them, join them. I'm liking that that's got a presence now, and even the spot under the jaw, I even made that even darker just to give it some extra gravity. Reinforcing the tail too with some shadows. It's important. I want that to read. Almost like a lollipop. There's just a little space at the tip of the tail that should look like the background, because you can see just a little bit of the seafloor coming through it. So I just wanted to give it just a tiniest bit of touch there. I guess I could have edited out some of the more quiet parts of the painting, more of the fiddly stuff, but this is how it really came together, and so for all time I just wanted to share it. I don't know about you, but when I sit down and paint, the whole world just falls away. It's very therapeutic. And I know I'm reminding myself again, I want to reiterate, I'm going to be lifting out some really fun highlights in a little bit. And so by putting down extra paint and kind of stacking those pigments up, it's going to give me something to lift back out of in a little while. And that's why more than usual I keep stacking the layers up here. Lift it off just a little bit with the towel there because I don't want to lose too many of the lights. If you don't have a glow, if you don't have a little bit of the paper coming back through your painting, it can go dead on you very quickly. And we don't want that. We want to keep the life in the painting. You'll definitely see me try to vary the color too, especially in the darker areas. You should never be able to look at any one square inch of a painting and see just one solid color ever. It's important that you put little splashes of color in, and that's one of my definite hallmarks, and you'll see me do it in a bit, adding some teals and some different colors in just to keep any one area from being overrun with too much of one color. It makes it exciting. We've created an entire world, underwater world here. It's pretty wonderful. Oh, I can hardly wait for the next step. I am really loading up the dark on the tail now because when we lift into this, it's really gonna stand out, and I'm just in anticipation of that, making some extra darks now. And that helps the front edge to look lighter. And there we go. And just softening that back just a little bit. So our old friend, the little square brush, is going to get quite a workout here in a minute. And you'll see some of the real power of that little brush. If you have any comments or any questions, I'd love to hear them. Please put them down below here. Try to respond as soon as I can, as often as I can. Feedback is always appreciated. I'm starting to get the feeling I'm getting towards the end of the painting, so just touching up some little edges and seeing what I think might need a little extra reinforcement. Being extra careful around that eye, but just wanting it to pop out just a little bit more. And see, just those couple little tiny brush strokes just made such a difference. To make a strong eye. Just sculpting, adding darks to push things back and letting light things bring them forward. It's all about shaping. Shaping with light, shaping with paint. And I think I've got quite a bit of paint on this now. It's going to be time to start taking it back off again. And maybe letting this layer rest. And it'll be time to do the final bits. We've come a long way since that blank piece of paper and lifting that little white shape out. This is a real creature now. So yeah, big washes, then basic shapes, adding shadows. That's all done. So now it's going to be time to put the finishing touches on the jewels on it to make it really sing. We've got a good base. It just needs to rest a little bit. So it'll be time for a cup of tea, stretch the legs, go for a little walk, play a little music, maybe watch a YouTube or two, and then come back and finish this off. Are you still in there with me? If you are, thanks for sticking around this long. I hope it's worth it for you. I know I'm having a blast. And time to rest. And we're back again. Coming down the home stretch. Oh, this is my favorite part. This is where, for me, the painting really comes alive. Putting on the little jewels, adding the details, the things that make it sizzle. So all that lovely paint that I've layered on this now, it's time to dig back through it and really make a statement. So using this little flat brush, I'm going to start lifting out ridges because I've got the darks, I've got the valleys. Now it's time to paint the peaks. And to do that in this nice soft blended way, I'm going to use this little flat brush and start putting some really powerful marks in here. I think I started with the tail because I wanted to do the smaller marks first. But oh, just wait till we get up to the top and see what this does. Super, super fun. Now the areas that have the most Brusho on them aren't going to lift as well because, again, Brusho is a staining color of the ink and dye base paint. But the Naples yellow and the Halloween orange, those are heavy pigmented, very opaque colors, and they're going to lift beautifully. And now all I'm doing is really just dipping this little brush in a little bit of water, squeegeeing it off just a little bit so it's not too wet, and then just lightly rubbing all in one spot, lifting that paint up and then just gently dabbing it. The painting is very dry though. It had a good, I mean, I let it dry for over an hour, hour and a half maybe. So yeah, so it'll lift up and not lift areas next to it. It'll make a more heavy contrasted mark. Now we're getting to the good stuff. I mean, check out this mark right here. I mean, this all of a sudden, boom. The whole shape of the seahorse just starts to come into focus. I wasn't really crazy about the jawline. I thought that jaw really needed to get rounded out a little bit, so I'm going to work on that here in a little bit. But what a powerful mark that was. I'm going to bring that eye out just a little bit more. That's how you do it. And I want to come right across this ridge line in the back and just start really cutting in and making some powerful statements. And this is just so much fun. Ah, love it. What are ways that you could think of for using this? What would you lift on? Can you see using this technique in your daily painting routine? I'd love to hear your comments. I mean, it works with trees, it'll work with foliage. You can do it in portraiture. There's all kinds of ways to use this lifting technique. Heavy lifting. It's not really heavy though. Very powerful in this tail. You have that nice dark to lift into. I'm really taking my time with this too, because I remember as I painted this, I was just thinking that I was just really enjoying myself. You see or read about the Tibetans and the Dene, the Navajo painters that do these amazing works of art, and then as they finish these intricate, beautiful, amazing accomplishments, they tip them up and let it all run together and start all over again, because it was the journey of creating the art that mattered, not the final outcome itself. And that's a good place to be when you're creating something. Try to focus on the journey, which is the experience of creating the art. And if you get something out of it, that's just bonus. But like I said earlier, if you're painting and the world just drops away for a little while and you're just in this amazing place, fully engaged, your creative spirit surging, I mean, life just doesn't get any better than that. So I'm working these ridges down. I don't want to, where it gets dark, I don't want to go too far back because that's the shadow side. But then those ridges will come into the light a little bit, and that's what's giving the contrast. You can see why now I put so much heavier paint on there earlier, because I knew it was going to be lifting back through it like this later. So now it's starting to pay off. The really fun thing is, as I'm doing this, all that lovely texture from the Brusho is still everywhere. So fun. Maybe it's a good thing that Brusho is such a staining paint. If it lifted through that, if it lifted out, it would be gone. I go through one of these little flat brushes about every year and a half or so. I just wear them out. And then it's time to get a new one. The edge just goes. But luckily I know a good art supply store to get them at. That's a pretty powerful statement right there. That has definitely turned into a seahorse. Now, there's a lot more details in a seahorse. I mean, they're very intricate and complicated and beautiful creatures. I'm definitely not adding all the details here, but just enough to insinuate what it is. I mean, if you were to paint every detail of a seahorse or every leaf on a tree, it would take you a lifetime. And I know there are people that like to do realistic realism like that, and that's a wonderful technique. But I just want to insinuate that this is a seahorse, insinuate the details and intricacies of its body systems or whatever. So adding some little circles here kind of gives it a little extra texture. But I'm not doing every single ridge that a real seahorse has. We would be here for 5 days. And this recording's already gone on quite a long time as it is. There's that jawbone finally. That was bugging me. It needed to be lighter right on top just so it would be just a little rounder. There you go. Maybe just a little bit more. And now we're at that part of the painting again where you just kind of sit back and look at it and try to figure out where you can tweak it, where you can finesse it. So just modeling and sculpting. This is kind of a fiddly part, but it's fun. All the little tweaks. And like most of you, you know, I look forward to finish a painting. I like to put it on social media and to share with everybody what I'm doing. You know, I have a whole network of painter friends, and we swap back and forth projects and ideas and things. And that's a great part of the fabric of my life that I really appreciate. And I remember as I was doing this one thinking, oh, this is going to be so much fun. I can't wait to show everybody. I imagine if I were on a desert island, again with the desert island, I would paint, but it wouldn't be nearly as much fun. I mean, without people to share your art with, it would be so much less. So I guess in a way I'm saying thank you for people like you for watching this video, and to all my art friends who I share with. I'm very grateful. You all definitely make this way more fun, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. You know, that tail of the seahorse got very dark, and it started with the Brusho and then the shadows, and it's right in line with that horizon line, which I really, really love. And well, as I was doing this, I was thinking maybe it was getting overdone and I wasn't super happy about it. But then I quickly realized it's my favorite part of the whole painting. I just love that dark little area, that dark fin, and how it brings the background and the seahorse kind of ties it all in together. I mean, talk about a happy accident. That's just one of my favorite parts of the whole painting. Of course, at this point, you could really fiddle around with this forever. And it would be real easy to overpaint it now and to make it look labored. So I'm hearing a little voice in my head telling me to kind of take it easy and not do too much. Gosh, what a wonderful effect. I mean, that's just so powerful. The front of the little Shrek definitely needed some lightening, though. And that paper towel sure has gotten to work out. There we go. Finally lightening that jaw up a little bit more. Now I'm loving it. Boom. Yay. A little more under the eye. I thought about painting some other fish in the background, kind of real ethereal and ghosty. But that could go sideways real easy, so I decided against that. Maybe next time. One of the things I do like to do, I'll photograph a painting that I do and put it in Photoshop real quick, or I've got an app on my phone called Art Studio, and I'll just put it in the digital program real quick, and I'll add things to the backgrounds, or I'll try different shadows and things to see if it might work on my painting. I have no problem with using digital tools as kind of an organic way to try things out, a non-destructive way to edit things. And then if it looks good, you can always do it on the painting. It's also a great way to critique, too. If a student at a workshop comes to me and says, what can I do to this painting? Sometimes it's fun to be able to just put it into a paint program real quick and say, here's what happens if you can make this background darker. See how this will bring this forward. Or what if you made this a little bit more reinforced here, or that a little bit more reinforced. So yeah, I highly recommend being able to use apps and things like that as tools. But of course, there's nothing like really having paintbrushes in your hand and paper on your table or on your easel. I started out my painting career by painting on an iPad, and then one day went to an art store and bought some art supplies, and then of course it was love at first paint, and it's been ever since. Anyway, I can't fiddle with this too much longer. It's going to get overpainted. It's time to sign it and call it a painting. This has been an absolute joy. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, I hope you've learned something and you can share it and pass it on. If you have any questions, please get a hold of me at ward@artofward.com. Reach out on Facebook, social media, Instagram. Be sure and give those people at Cheap Joe's your business. They're a lovely company. I highly recommend them. And I hope we'll get to paint together again sometime.